I think it's probably going to be slightly above average harvest in terms of yield. I think the 10-year average is somewhere around 9 tonnes, at 3.6 tonnes per acre. I would say on average, what I'm hearing in my part of the world anyway, I think and I hope it will be above that. I'd say look between 3.5 and 4.5 is where the most are, and I would say the average from what I'm hearing in my area anyway was probably something 3.75, 3.8, somewhere around there. But look, that could change as we get more reports, you know.
The recent rain has brought harvest to a stop for the moment, but many will look back at the last week as one of the best harvesting weeks in quite some time. Yields are looking more encouraging this year, but it's a long way before we've got all the grain safely in the shed. You are listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We would really appreciate it if you could listen, follow and give us a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast from. I'm delighted today to be joined by Ciaran Collins and Shay, Phelan, both tillage specialists in Teagasc, to chat about how the harvest is going to date. Shay, obviously the harvest is underway at the moment. What sort of progress has been made? Is all the winter barley cut at the moment?
From what I hear, Michael, yeah, it's pretty much all done and dusted. There might be an odd few crops in certain parts of the country left out there, but for the most part, it's pretty much done. Talking to a few guys in Donegal, even as late as Monday, and they were pretty much wrapped up for most guys up there. Any of the early sown crops like of Joyu or anything like that, they were being harvested up there. And likewise was in Meath yesterday, and same story, pretty much all wrapped up.
Okay, and Ciaran, down your part of the world down south, all done as well, is it?
Pretty much, Michael, yeah. I mean, farmers made good use of the few fine days there last week, you know. It brought in anything that was any bit late. So yeah, no, it's I'd say 99% wrapped up at this stage, yeah.
And Ciaran, as you're there, what's the feeling about yields? Have we got enough reports back in to really nail it down, or where do you think they are at?
Yeah, I suppose. Look, we're probably just getting to the start of it really, and just figuring out where it is. I suppose tentatively, I think it's probably going to be slightly above average harvest in terms of yield. I think the 10-year average is somewhere around 9 tonnes, at 3.6 tonnes per acre. I would say on average, what I'm hearing in my part of the world anyway, I think and I hope it will be above that. Having said that, the reports seem to be a little bit variable. You know, there's some growers are tipping in around the 4 tonne, you know, and over it in cases. And then, you know, you'll sort of find a few of the lower ones as well, which can be hard to explain because I think most crops look pretty well this year. I'd say look between 3.5 and 4.5 is where the most are, and I would say the average from what I'm hearing in my area anyway was probably something, I don't know, 3.75, 3.8, somewhere around there. But look, that could change as we get more reports, you know.
Okay, and Shay, further up the country, there might have been maybe, I know whether there's probably more or less drought in various different areas. What's your feeling about what's out there?
Yeah, I'd say certainly, Michael, some of the lighter soils suffered a yield penalty based on those drought conditions that we had. And I suppose the other thing that we kind of have to factor in is that some of the barley was harvested at very, very low moistures. So some of it was harvested as down as low as 11.5% moisture. So obviously you're losing quite a bit of yield on that when you're harvesting that low. But I suppose another thing that has raised its head are a few comments that I did get. I happened to be at a grower meeting last night, was the take-all, that there was quite a bit of take-all out there in some second barley crops after, say, wheat or something like that. So if we think back last autumn, quite a lot of winter barley was early sown. So it probably was an underlying problem out there, that take-all problem that we probably didn't really factor in up until lately, really, do you know?
And didn't seem necessarily, Shay, to rear its head during the growing season, because lots of those crops, as far as I would have seen, they probably held on reasonably well, if you know what I mean, in terms of greenness towards the end.
Yeah, and I'd agree with you, Michael, but I think certainly when we saw drought conditions there in May, you would have seen some crops, certainly around Carlow, you would have seen some crops on lighter soils turn a little bit whitish or lose a little bit of their colour on some of those sandy banks that we tend to have around here. And likewise, as you move up in towards the Thigh in Kildare, You would have seen some of that as well in South Laois. I think was something similar down around that Durrow area, which tends to be quite sandy in areas down around there. There would have been a bit of kind of that loss of color in those crops in May, and I suppose that's kind of contributing to some of those comments about take all as well.
And Shay, and I'll come back to Ciaran in a second, but Shay, did you see, was there any reports of any brackling or lost heads or that kind of stuff, or was that pretty good? And I suppose in the same regard, was there any differential in varieties that you heard? Anything that was outstanding, or everything's pretty much in the pack?
The Brackling end of it, Michael, seems to be fine. I haven't heard anything really of much concern that way, albeit, I suppose, looking or talking to growers who were harvesting last week, there was a bit of straw breakdown starting to happen, and that's probably as a consequence of the really short or really warm temperatures last week, and the straw dried out very, very quickly. That said, I suppose, and it's kind of counterintuitive. A lot of growers were commenting that the straw wasn't actually fit to bale. It was actually quite damp, so they had to leave it on the ground for 2 or 3 days before they bale it. Coming back to varieties, I suppose the six rows have done relatively well. That most people are relatively happy with them. The BYDV tolerant varieties seem to have done relatively well as well. The one comment on varieties that I've been getting consistently over the last week or so is that Cassia seems to be at the bottom end of the yield spectrum for growers, and I suppose that's a worry because I mean, being the having the quality grain that it has, there's nothing really there yet to match it. So if those quality markets like the toasting barley and stuff like that, if Cassia is not holding up its yield end of the bargain, it'll probably make growers question the viability of growing it.
And downside, Ciaran, did you anything special that you heard around varieties, or and again a similar scenario around that breakdown scenario?
Yeah, in terms of straw breakdown, no, definitely. I think it was the first time in a while. Maybe we've obviously had a slightly earlier winter barley harvest. I think that's a factor there. So straw breakdown, lodging would have been small enough, I reckon. Just on the point of the take all one, the one thing I have noticed, and look, it's not just this year; it's in recent years, but there is a trend with some growers to grow winter barley after a break crop. I suppose that maybe more to do with wheat and varieties more, and some of the risks there than anything else. But like there's a definite benefit there, and which would be obvious, I suppose, growing it as a first crop after break rather than a second crop. But like there is that element always that is pushing yield a little bit more. And the second element of yield as well, and we see this every year, is high fertility sites always are doing much better. And winter barley seems to emphasize that more than other crops, where there's good organic manures or good indices for P and K. That definitely you can see that when people are coming back to reporting on yields. In terms of varieties, I think it's too early to say. I think certainly like Shay said there, the tolerant, the BYDV tolerant varieties are certainly, they're proving their worth, I suppose, really, in the sense that, while it wouldn't have been majorly a BYDV year, but still I think we are seeing the benefits of those, all right.
I suppose the other question then is around straw, which is obviously an important part of the income. Was there, Ciaran, what were the straw yields like, or what's the reports like around there? And I presume it's all pretty much baled, is it?
It's not baled anyway, no, because a lot of the harvesting only finished, say, the end of last week, and it's obviously we had rain there on Sunday evening and there, so there's a good bit of straw on the ground still. So yields are good enough, I think. I suppose, look, yields of straw tend to follow the yields of grain, I suppose, so there is some variability in it. But most growers I've been talking to so far are kind of happy enough with straw yield, but yeah, a bit of it to be baled yet, though.
Okay, and Shay, up further up the country, straw yield's pretty good.
Yeah, I agree with Ciaran, Michael. If you put it in terms of 4x4s an acre type thing, I suppose most growers were reporting somewhere in the region of 14 to 15 4x4s an acre. So from that point of view, um, they're happy enough with the straw yields that are there. I would say up around here, pretty much all of the straws baled. Very little of it left. I mean, probably most growers wrapped up the grain harvest probably Thursday, Friday, maybe Saturday last week, and probably I'd say Sunday. I certainly would have seen a lot of balers on the road last Sunday, and even going up and down from Meath yesterday, there was very little straw left on field. Most of it was baled and some of it actually gone. So I would say up around here, pretty much a large majority of the straw is baled at this stage.
And just driving the country, I was up in Meath direction and kind of down towards Cork direction. I noticed there's certainly some bales left in fields, Shay, but I do notice there's an awful lot of fields cleared already. Is there pretty good demand for straw out there?
It's a good question, Michael, I suppose, because again, when you talk to farmers about the straw demand, there doesn't seem to be a huge panic on growers to get straw. Um, and basically, what I've been hearing over the last week or so is that similar sort of demand to this time last year. And so similar type prices as well. And that's kind of where it seems to be for growers at the moment. So, I mean, I'm not going to start putting prices out there because I'm going to be quoted maybe later on, but a very similar type demand to this time for the winter barley harvest last year. Now, how that progresses through the season, we don't know because we might have more straw, may or may not have more straw on some of the spring crops later on in the harvest.
I suppose maybe Shay, for anybody listening, in terms of if they're not maybe a cereal farmer, but cereal farmers would probably agree that the quality of straw is really good this year, I think so.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, very little of the straw last week got baled, had got any rain at all. Practically none of it got any rain at all last week. Although, as Ciaran says, there's probably some down his country that will have got the rain this last couple of days. But I saw that most of it up around here didn't even have to get turned or anything like that, or waffled or anything like that. So it should be good quality stuff.
So, Ciaran, then we are, as we're not finished one year, but we're kind of slipping into next already in terms of there's stubble fields out there that are, if not cleared, to be cleared shortly. What should farmers be thinking about now in terms of that stubble ground? What's the actions they should be maybe lining up if there's a little bit of a break in the weather before the next bit of harvest kind of starts?
Yeah, I suppose. Look, the first one obviously is winter barley is quite often the window or the door to winter oilseed rape. So it's a great opportunity there now, and fields are getting cleared and that, and there's a good bit of time just to get ground ready for winter oilseed rape or to start thinking about it. Maybe if for some growers, it can be an opportunistic crop where if the weather is suitable and the fields are cleared, growers will put it in, and winter oilseed rape is a great value as a break crop. And sowing it early obviously is vital to get that good green cover there, before the growth slows. So I suppose oilseed rape is the first one, I suppose, really. The second one then is around the whole nitrates directive and all that stuff. The shallow cultivation is required where, a grower isn't sowing a catch crop or isn't going to sow a winter crop before the 31st of October. So just to be aware of that, or just a reminder, that to shallow cultivate, and it will be a good opportunity to do it, and doing it early is better, in terms of getting growth there, or same with cover crops as well. If winter barley ground, say, is harvested and it's destined for a spring crop, to get your catch or cover crop in there, the stubble cultivation has to be done within 10 days of harvest, within 14 days of harvesting, basically. And it's for the major tillage counties. There's 14 in the list. I won't list them all off, but it's all the major tillage areas anyway. And the other small one there then is just a reminder that you have to leave, a minimum of 20 and a max of 25% of land must be left for seed-eating birds. So just, your total cereal area, get 25% of that, and that has to be left for seed-eating birds, unless obviously you're planting winter cereals or catch crops.
There's a bit of calculation to be done there, and you can do it at any stage, but it's better off knowing as a farmer what you can or should leave versus what you can or would like to plant. I suppose it's good calculation to do. Just one last question on that, Ciaran, in terms of sterile brome tends to be a problem out there, especially in kind of a min-till scenario. What advantage, or is there an advantage for sterile brome or maybe other bromes in terms of that stubble cultivation you're talking about?
Yeah, sure. I suppose it depends what you have, and as you rightly say, sterile brome is the probably predominant one of the brome species out there. So, immediately stubble cultivating there is what you need to do. So the earlier you get in there, the better. It will germinate, once any bit of moisture comes. But you do need to to cover that seed. Now, if you have the likes of meadow brome, maybe leaving that on the surface for 2 weeks is advisable there to break dormancy before you stubble cultivate. So it really depends what type of brome you have. But look, as I say, the majority of what we think is out there would be sterile brome. So early stubble cultivation would be the best measure there.
Shay, can I come back to you there around stored grain? So for farmers who, and I think you mentioned it there, farmers were, they're harvesting grain if they're storing it at home. The moistures were good, so they might have decided to put it into the shed, 11 or 12 or 13% moisture. Is there any issues that farmers should be looking out for in terms of that grain going into the shed?
Yeah, I suppose, Michael, it's a good point because, a lot of the grain was harvested last week, should I say, were harvested at relatively high temperatures. So when you're putting that grain into long-term storage, there is the risk that that grain can sweat because it's probably at mid to high 20s when it was harvested. So when that is put into a pile or into a heap, that can heat up even more and start to sweat. So really and truly, growers should really be looking at that grain and trying to cool it down if at all possible, running the air through it. For any of them that have pedestals or anything like that, that's probably the wisest choice to do with that grain at the moment, especially if you have any volume of it. So an odd load here and there won't make any difference, but if you're storing a couple of 100 tons of it, by all manner of means, you should be trying to take the temperature out of that grain and do it as soon as you possibly can. And I presume, look, at most people are doing that at the moment, but for anybody who mightn't be used to storing grain long term, given that they're at very low temperatures last week, they might think, this is okay now, it'll store pretty well. But that grain was at relatively high temperatures last week, so there is that risk that it will sweat and it will go moldy.
So Shay, the grain is quite warm, but the evenings or the nights are quite cool. However, there might be a little bit more damp. Is there any issue with, turning on the fans at the right time, if you know what I mean, turn them on at nighttime? But is there any worry then that some of the air might be a bit damp going into it?
Shouldn't really, Michael. I suppose if you're taking that temperature on, like the humidity at the moment is relatively high. So if you're cooling that temperatures late in the evening time, that humidity should have dropped. So you should be okay. I would say to most people at this stage, just get probes, put them into the crops, see what temperature the grain is at, and then work away after that, see what you need to do after that, and take out the heat out of the pile of grain, if you like. Albeit, I suppose you have to be a little bit wary of condensation, where you have maybe very, very cool nights and you have hot temperatures in the grains. You can, if you're forcing cool air through that grain, you can potentially, I suppose, just maybe cause a bit of condensation. So you just have to keep an eye out for that.
Last question, Ciaran, to you. We're only started harvest. There's only winter barley for the most part finished. Some obviously the rape is cut around here, but not certainly a lot, and a bit of oats has been cut as well. But where do you think our harvest is going to shake out, do you think, Ciaran, in terms of is there still good yields to come? Are we going to have a similar, or are we going to have more grain in the country this year than we would have had in the last couple of years?
I think it looks like it'll be touch wood above average. I know based on our own calculations, we were looking at somewhere in the region of 2.2 million tons. That's based on the area from the basic payment and sort of projected yields. I suppose some of the big ones there would be the likes of winter wheat. You'd still say prospects are still quite good, even though, having said that, they are coming quite quick at us. So that might be a little bit of a concern. I suppose the dry weather maybe having some bit of an impact there.
It's a fusarium in them as well.
Yeah, actually, as a matter of interest, I had a look at a Department of Agriculture variety trial site that's near me last evening, and it's easy enough to pick out fusarium in some of the weaker varieties, definitely. Now, the only thing I would say is that, like, Graham would be a big variety out there. Dawson maybe be small now, but both of those are reasonably okay. There's a bit in Champion there as well. So I suppose the point being that some of the worst fusarium would be in some of the weaker varieties that aren't growing or growing at a low level. So I hope that won't impact too much, but it's there. There's certainly little bits of it there, just that wet weather during flowering that we had. But overall prospects, I think, look good. I think spring barley is the other one. I mean, we're saying it all year, like, but some of the early spring barleys that were sown, got fertilizer there before the rain, before that drought, they look really good, but there is a tail to spring barley. There are those ones that got nipped by the drought, or those ones that got heavy rain after sowing. So, there is that little bit of a tail that will be in spring barley. But look, overall, I think prospects are still reasonably good, hopefully.
That's great, Ciaran. Listen, thanks very much, Ciaran, and thanks very much to Shay as well. And look, we'll be touching base with you again before the end of the harvest just to see how it's getting on. Thanks again, guys.
Thanks, Michael.
So that's it for today, and my thanks to Shay and Ciaran for joining me on the podcast. So finally, if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague, and always rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy, thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.